People can't join it.
So I've got the host started this webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Is it clear now, the image?
No, there's two bars now. Oh, that's better.
Yeah, voila.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, grand. Okay. I can't see me though. But I'll just have to not see me. I don't know where I've gone. I can only see my screen, my image.
So you are live now.
Okay.
Just so you know.
How do we know when people have arrived? Presumably there's a...
They should be in now. You've got 39 people in. So the participant, 40 people, participant count at the bottom. So everyone can hear you and you can...
Oh, goodness me. Right, okay, well, we'll give it a couple of minutes. What, perhaps? Yeah, a couple of minutes before people, before we get started with Caroline. So I'll hold back on the introduction of Caroline for a few moments. If you are one of the 43 people so far, then please feel free to sign in on the chat and also announce where you are. So far, we've got somebody called Laura from Cumbria. Don't know who she is. Michael has arrived. He's arrived by announcing that he has arrived, which is rather regal, but there we go. Sharon's done it twice. Hello and hello all. Yeah, it's soggy in Manchester. I can guarantee it's soggy on this side of the Pennines either, as well. But Giggleswick, I would imagine it's pretty wet up there as well. But anyway, goodness, all over the place. London, Watford, Nottingham, Derbyshire. But yeah, keep signing in. We'll give it perhaps about another minute. There's 46 of us so far. I seem to have recovered my voice. I did say something at this morning's session, but I thought as I was speaking, my voice was croaking. So hopefully I sound a bit more, well, I was going to say a bit more Radio 4 announcer. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but Dorset, Windermere, Cheltenham, the West Country, windy Rochdale. Yeah, it's always windy in Rochdale. You chose the wrong side of the Pennines, I'm afraid. Taras. Penrith. Right, Penrith. I like Penrith. It's kind of one of the gateways to the Lake District, and sunny Oxfordshire. Well, at least it's sunny somewhere. Right, okay. I think it's now 3 minutes past, so perhaps we'll make a start. We're on the cusp of 50 people, 49 people. Now, before I introduce Caroline, just a few bits and pieces. First of all, any questions that you have while Caroline is speaking, please put them in the chat, and I'll make a note of them as we're listening. And then I think after Caroline's finished her talk, she's going to show a short video. It's about 10 minutes long. Now, I watched this video this morning, and I have to say it's very good. So I would, if you were tempted to, I don't know, go and watch the rugby or something, don't, because watching the video, I think, is a real highlight of what we're about to see. So anyway, the Q&A things will be after the video. But if you've got the questions, then just stick them in the chat function and I'll make a note of them and feed them to Caroline in a few minutes. Now, remember that this is free, or rather it is free unless you've made a donation. And you can make a donation by visiting the PayPal website of the Cycle Touring Festival. And I've just put the link to that in the chat box. I think the recommended donation is £5 per household per talk, but this must be deal of the century. If you fork out 20 quid, you can ease your conscience for the entire week. I mean, there are 20 talks, probably, looking at the list here, probably more than 20. 20 times £5 is well over 100 quid. So you're getting a massive discount there if you pay 20 quid and turn up to every single event. So that's what, well, I certainly did a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, there you go. So please do donate, because Laura and Tim, they do have costs to cover. All the speakers, all the hosts, we all do it for free. Yeah, so please donate just to help cover the costs. And as Laura pointed out this morning, any surplus is actually going to be invested in a field behind where where Tim and Laura now live, up in Kendal. And she said that's going to be open up to anybody who wants to go and camp there. So that's brilliant. Right, I've waffled too much. I think I've got everything. Yeah, I put the donation button there. Now, Caroline has appeared a couple of times on my podcast, the Cycling Europe podcast. Quick plug for that. But far greater than that, she's actually appeared on Radio Bristol and even on Radio 4. And I've actually nicked the introduction from BBC Sounds, and because I think it just kind of sums up Caroline perfectly. And it says, Caroline Burrows is a poet who uses the freedom of the open road to inspire her poetry. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Caroline. Keep those questions coming, and over to you, Caroline.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming along to Cycle Touring Festival. Thanks, Andrew. So I'm Caroline Burrows, and I write poetry, short stories, and travel articles. And I also love riding my bike. So my bike usually ends up in a lot of what I'm writing about. So this talk is about a project I talked briefly about at last year's Cycle Touring Festival when it was in its early stages, called Bristol Bike Bard, and how it's grown since then. I'm also going to talk about some other projects and how they fed into or connect to how Bristol Bike Bard came about. And I'll be talking a little bit about how some of that relates to managing my own mental health, particularly anxiety and depression. And then we'll finish with the Bristol Bike Bard documentary by Dave McFarlane at the end, and then have some time for questions after that. So on the screen here, I've got sort of the evolution of Bike Bard and all the things that came about from it. But before Bristol Bike Bard ever existed, I did a poetry project called A Year of Trying to Be Environmentally Friendly, It's Not Easy Being Green, which had me posting a verse of poetry a day, every day for an entire year on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter about the failures and successes of me trying to be a bit more green. So I started that in September 2019, and a lot of those verses also featured my bike. So I've got an example of just a few of those verses, but the top left one was about when my bike received a secondhand crane bike bell, and it was from Andrew, your host.
At that point, Caroline, can I just interrupt you when you're mentioning my beautiful bell? Now, people have pointed out that they can see a brown, a grey box on the right-hand side, and the reason is because you've put, I think it's the window where you can see that's it. Can you drag that across so it's out of the
let me minimize
where the videos are, where you can see presumably my picture and your own video.
Is that gone?
No, it's still there. There, perfect. Leave it like that.
Okay, great.
Even better. Right, I'll shut up and let you talk about my bell.
Your bike bell. So the previous owner of the crane bike bell was Andrew, and he put a call out online giving away some old kit. So that verse was verse 331. And I'll read that one. It goes, my bike was lacking a bicycle bell. I've been sent an old one by fellow cyclist Andrew, whom I know through the Cycling Touring Festival. It's shiny and much better than buying one new. It's not easy being green. This bike community likes to share and reuse. So I was really happy to get that bike bell. It's a very famous bell Andrew's got a video of it ringing on YouTube that's got over 50,000 views, which is more than any poetry ever gets, not just my poetry, most poetry. Bottom left was a verse I wrote. My friend Neil in the Netherlands sent me a photograph of his park where the benches are made out of bicycle frames underneath the wood. And then the top right verse, number 290, was about a Shakespearean group of actors called the Handlebards, whom I'd seen perform a few times and who tour by bike. So that verse goes, a Shakespearean theatre company, the Handlebards, tour on bikes with trailers. Their webinar showed how they travel sustainably and encouraged the same from their theatre goers. It's not easy to be green. They inspired in how to be greener. And then the bottom verse was about, I bought the same trailer they had secondhand. So the Crane bike bell, Andrew's bike bell, and the Handlebards, they come up again later. They're important to the bike bard story. So pre-pandemic, I'd been living in the northwest of England for a couple of years, and I received a message on Instagram when I was posting It's Not Easy Being Green from a filmmaker up there called Dave McFarlane. He was interested in filming something about the eco-verses, and we arranged a meeting, but this coincided when I was becoming increasingly unwell with anxiety and depression. So I had to cancel that meeting because I was in no shape for anything. And I thought it was a real shame and that ship had sailed, but there wasn't really any other choice at the option when that was going on. But despite my mental health declining at that point, I managed to continue writing these short verses, which was great because at the time I couldn't read or write much because my concentration was shot, but I was able to do my eco verses. And I regard them as one of the sort of lifelines at that time that kept me going, along with the NHS and support of friends and family. So I started recovering from that bout of that episode of depression just as the pandemic began and the first lockdown started. And being isolated is not a healthy option for someone recovering from depression. So to keep myself in contact with people, I began compiling the eco verses into videos in groups of 10 with me and guest readers arranged alternately. And that kept me in contact with people. So if you look closely, you'll be able to spot some other cycle touring festival attendees and speakers on there that I persuaded to record videos for me, along with friends and basically anyone that would do a video, because there was 367 of them. So I basically created my own social engagement project before I knew the term social engagement project existed. And I started putting them on YouTube, whether anyone wanted to see them or not. It was for my own benefit, really. But those videos actually helped me gain my first poetry commission for Bristol Ideas and Glenside Hospital Museum. Oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. I will show you two of the videos, two clips, hopefully they'll play. So this is Heather, my friend in the States, and also one of me. So it's just a short clip.
I was repairing something with super glue, nearly stuck my fingers together. Got glue in my t-shirt, which burned a hole through, repaired one item while destroying another. It's not easy being green. I wonder, was it worth the bother?
365. I was going to cycle north of the border, but the COVID goalposts keep moving locations. I'll go more local, try averting disorder. Paper maps powered by brain, pedals by leg rotations. It's not easy being green, but it's about the journey, not the destination.
So those videos actually were really good in more ways than one, but one of the remarkable things was they got me my first official poetry commission for Bristol Ideas and Glenside Hospital Museum. And that's a museum that exhibits the history of mental health care, because it's the former Victorian Bristol Lunatic Asylum. So we created a series of 4 videos specifically for suicide awareness and prevention, detailing help and resources available. It again had guest readers, and it was really good being able to advocate for mental health that way from having come from a bad experience myself. So Bristol Ideas that year was also in tandem with 250 years anniversary of the death of Thomas Chatterton. So he was a poet. You may not know who he was, but that painting's quite famous. You maybe know the infamous painting of him dying possibly by suicide in an attic, age 17 in London. So it's sort of the doomed poet image. So it was great. It was great to get that commission and to write something that I was really passionate about. And all of this had me returning to live in Bristol in September 2020. So I moved 4 days after writing the final verse of It's Not Easy Being Green. And I continued working my way through putting the videos together. I did another commission for Glenside. And then I thought I'd feel relieved not writing a verse of poetry every day. But the problem was that I had done it every day for an entire year. So I did and established a really strong habit. So only about a week went by before I started missing my daily verses. So by then, my mental health was much better. And even though I was back in a city where I'd lived before and had a good support network of friends, lockdowns were rumoured to be making a comeback. So I already spend most of my time indoors writing alone. And I knew I needed to find a way to make sure I went out, even if only for a short time, especially as winter was coming, to look after my mental health. So that's how Bristol Bike Bard came about. So to make sure I stuck to my intention to go outside, I pronounced myself Bristol Bike Bard, whether Bristol wanted one or not. And I made up a sort of image that I was going to use. And then I began posting verses like with It's Not Easy Being Green. So the first place I cycled to on the 1st of October 2020 was to see Thomas Chatterton, because there's a statue of him in Bristol. So verse 1 was, I cycled to meet forever young Thomas Chatterton, 2 poets hanging out in Bristol's Millennium Square. His peers skateboarded while his warm eyes in cold bronze watched on. So I was really happy to go and sit beside that statue for a while. I also wanted to set myself a new challenge in poetic terms and write a different form. So I chose to write in something called terza rima, which is what Dante did in his Divine Comedy, where he goes into the circles of hell, which is what I was creating for myself with this structure. But it's 3 lines, and lines 1 and 3 rhyme and 2 doesn't, and then 2 becomes the rhyme in lines 1 and 3 in the next verse. So they form a chain. I thought it was like a bicycle chain. That was my my rationale for it. So to show them working, verse 2 goes, cycling in the masses up Church Road's hellish thoroughfare, I found sanctuary in St. George Park's tree-lined avenue, where branches raised to show the way to heavenly fresh air. In verse 3, a damp grey day trying to make Bristol feel blue, brightened with a ride to Glenside Hospital Museum. Its history of mental health care, a helpful change of view. So it was really nice to go and visit Glenside, because I'd done the work for them remotely. So that was the first time I met them. So I wasn't being overly prescriptive about writing every day, but it worked out nearly every other. And a lot of verses are about East Bristol, which isn't the touristy epicentre, but has many things which piqued my interest. I was cycling in my local area. So I realised quite early on that what I'm interested in seems to be a few things. Something if it's really quirky, like this TARDIS, I'll explain in a minute. And also the meaning of place names and how they kind of give insight into what the landscape was when somewhere was named. So verse 16, pedalling along the Bristol Bath bike path, I laughed. Wormley's waiting room cafe has the top star loo. It's a TARDIS putting bums on seats, a toilet surpassed. That toilet is in the Lonely Planet Guide to the Best Toilets in the World. I think it's 100. It's just fab. And the Bristol Bath bike path is also amazing. It's if you don't know, it's nearly 15 miles traffic free on an old disused railway line linking Bristol and Bath. So Wormley's sort of in the middle with a TARDIS toilet. And then Staple, any place called Stapleton, Staple Hills with staple in it has got a meaning in the name, which is verse 31. By Bristol's east border, I park my bike to stand on Staple Hill Road at a boundary marker, which is what stay pole meant in Anglo-Saxon land. So Bristol kind of extends beyond that now. It's all suburban building out, but you can, anywhere with staple is a boundary name originally. So as well as discovering or rediscovering Bristol, because I'd moved back, I was discovering what I'm attracted to. And Bristol's got lots of literary connections. So I was really excited to find plaques, one to do with the Romantic poets and another for Angela Carter, who's she writes well, she's passed away, but she writes these amazing fairy tales. So verse 96, I cycle to see the queen of the dark tales of fairies. Angela Carter magicked up spellbinding words within this crescent in Bristol in the 1960s. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, whose name I still struggle to pronounce correctly, is one of my all-time favourite poets. I love Rime of the Ancient Mariner, so this was great finding where he first got published, which is verse 57. In freezing brizzle drizzle, I rode to Corn Street's corner, where words by Coleridge, Wordsworth, Southey and Lamb were set free by Joseph Cottle, the publisher. So sometimes what I've found is that as an adult, when I go out on my bike, usually it's quite goal-led. You know, I have to get from A to B efficiently or quickly, or it's commuting. And what Bristol Bike Bard kind of did for me was it made me feel like a kid again, because I would just go out on my bike to see what I could find, and with no set destination. So I'd pedal down roads I'd never been before just to see where they went, and I'd get lost, but then I'd find really good things, like there's a druid on a grave, and also funny name streets again. So there's Hot Water Lane. So I'll read these two verses. 64. I rode to a cemetery to look at the gravestones and found a druid holding a scythe beneath an oak tree, marking the last resting place of a Henry Hodges' bones. And 103. I pedalled in spring sunshine, but the forecast was untrue. In Bitton, I hid from hailstones under an evergreen, got mocked in Hot Water Lane by skies that had been blue. So by the winter of 2020, I'd recovered from the episode of depression from earlier that year. But what I've noticed about my anxiety and depression is how they can feed into each other. So I find depression easier to identify. It's got a more obvious sort of character, but for me, anxiety is much sneakier. So I know if I stay in the house for one day, that's okay. But if that becomes 2 or then 3 days, my anxiety starts getting quite building, it starts getting quite bad. And I begin finding it difficult to then go outside, and it can kind of quickly snowball. And if I leave it unchecked, that can start spiraling towards feelings of depression. So it's something I need to pay attention to. And posting the bike bards was really helping me avoid going into hermit mode. So it was working, it was stimulating and good for my head and good for my body, and just good for finding about Bristol. So one thing I've found when posting verses is not to get caught up in how many likes anything gets. Cycling is niche, poetry is niche, so combining the two is ultra niche and not bound to get masses of likes. But nevertheless, if I become a successful writer one day, that would be amazing. And of course, it's lovely when stuff is seen and liked, because I am posting it publicly. So I experimented with different hashtags and started getting some nice feedback. I've been tagging Bristol Cycling Campaign, who do really good work about trying to get better routes and more cycling supported in the city. And they do a thing called Bristolians on Bikes on Instagram, and they did a 3-part feature in December 2020, which was really nice because it was early on in my project then. And they even featured, I was really chuffed about this, at Christmas I made a Christmas cog tree out of sprockets, old sprockets stuck together, and my old housemate made the stand, so they featured the Christmas cog tree, which I wrote a verse about as well. So I just kept going out because it was encouraging. And this led me to writing a verse about my local bike shop in Hannam. So like the handlebars and the bike bell, there'll be more about my local bike shop later, John Woods in Hannam. But they had this really cool setup for COVID with a nice handlebar thing at the door to ring for them. So verse 43, at the bike shop, their door has a COVID screen to speak through and a fab bike bell on handlebars to ring for service. Reassuring and nice touches from an indie venue. And then on the way home from getting my little folding bike fixed, I found a nature reserve I'd never seen before. It's called Magpie Bottom, so that just made me laugh. But on my freshly fixed folding bike, a new place was revealed. Magpie Bottom Nature Reserve links Hannam to Kingswood. Magpies in trees, ducks in the brook, and through the mud I wheeled. So I was doing these verses, they're dated November and December. So I was doing the verses over winter, which is a horrible time of year. But one of the interests I developed during lockdown part 1, back when I was unwell, was going out at night with a star app on my phone to learn about the constellations. And that's really changed how I view wintertime, because it's more star hours when it's not raining. So some of my bike bard verses were about looking up. So when the Perseverance rover landed on Mars last February, Mars was visible in the sky. And then Bristol came up really top trumps because my good friend Fiona saw a sign in Kingswood Park that I was straight down to see when she told me about it, because a scientist called Colin Pillinger was born in Kingswood, and he worked on the Beagle rovers, that the mission to Mars. It was in the early 2000s. So verse 92, Perseverance has gone one way to Mars to do some tasks. From Earth on my bike, I saw a gold speck above the moon. Can rocket ships one day come back? That's what this mission asks. And in 102, on my bike, I found directions to Mars in Kingswood Park. A sign points to the planet, an asteroid's up there too. It's named Pillinger after Colin, a bright science spark. So that's just the best sign I've ever seen in my entire life. I just love it. Mars, it's up that way. So that was February last year. And this time last year, it was the Cycle Touring Festival as well. And incidentally, Laura, who organises the Cycle Touring Festival, she was the first person ever to call me Cycle Poet, which I now use as my hashtag. So thanks to the Cycle Touring Festival again for just helping. So last year's talk I gave was about Wilfred Owen, because I did a tour tracing him. And in that, I included a poem which had the background noise of a bike chain and a bike bell, just sound effects. And then I spoke briefly about Bike Bard, and I played the first video compilation, which was just me speaking with no sound effects. But also at last year's festival, I watched a wonderful talk by a man called Paul Cheese, who's a cycling musician, and he'd pedalled all around the UK recording sound effects, and he put it into actual proper music because he's a musician, and it was just amazing. So around this time, I was also sending in my poems to BBC Radio Bristol. There's a wonderful show hosted by Adam Crowther on BBC Radio Bristol called Upload, and he plays music and podcasts and poetry by people in and around Bristol, along with current hits. So he played a few of my poems, but I began sending in the Bristol Bike Bard poems. And Adam did this really lovely thing. He put sound effects on my vocal, but he also added some music, and it really lifted it. It's like a gentle handpan playing. So this is an example of what Adam did on Bike Bard Part 2, which is on the BBC Sounds website. It's just a short clip.
Borada, I say when I meet a friend for a coffee, at a place on the cobbled corner of Welsh Back. Ships from Wales brought slate and coal here historically.
So it was just really inspiring what Adam had done, and Paul Cheese's talk. And so I realised what my Bike Bard poems needed was a good backing track, and I knew just the bike bell for the job. Andrew P. Sykes's Crane Bell was going back on YouTube. I sampled it, duplicated it, changed the pitch, added chains whirring and gears clicking to the rhythm of a waltz, because Bike Bard's written in terza rima in lines of 3. And I came up with this, and I'd like to warn you that I have had no musical training. This is just, it's for my own entertainment, but this is how Bike Bard sounds with a bike bell orchestra.
At Troopers Hill, out cycling my local circuit, a notice board shared with me this random act of kindness. Thank you for this happy pink heart crochet locket. As it's lockdown, I can't ride off to the circus. Instead, in Bristol, 2 circus angels floated my way on stilts. The street was lit up by Corvus Angelicus.
So that was amazing, because everything was shut because it was lockdown. Circus performers Corvus Angelicus got to do these walks around the street with music, and it was just surreal and magical. So there's stuff going on. People will still do things and perform any way they can. It was just marvelous. So as well as being played on the radio, Bristol 24/7, which is like a What's On in Bristol kind of website, did a feature online about the Bike Bard verses. That was in March 21. And then throughout March and April, Upload, Adam kept playing the Bike Bards that I sent in. So all of this was really, really encouraging, because being a writer or a creative involves a lot of rejection. You have to keep sending your work out, and the majority of replies, if you even get a reply, is often negative. So it can be quite soul destroying. So I just remind myself it's part of the gig, and part of the gig is to not give up. But having feedback like this was just really affirming to keep having a go. So great things can happen. You can get played on the radio, you can get featured in magazines, and then even life can get even stranger in a wonderful way. So the handlebars that I mentioned earlier that have made it impossible for me to say the word handlebars anymore, I always say handlebars now, the Shakespearean theatre troupe, they announced in March 21 that they were launching a gear shift artist development program to help early creatives learn how to take a show on tour. So of course I applied, and in my proposal, I wrote about wanting to take my poetry show on the road by bike like they do, while sort of singing my verses for my supper like a old medieval bard. And it's something I talked about on one of Andrew P. Sykes, the host, podcast about a year earlier. I just mentioned it as a kind of dream or hope one day. So that's what I wrote about in my proposal. And I got selected for an interview. So I was very nervous and got prepared for that. And then also in April, Bristol Life magazine contacted me because they'd heard Bike Bard on Radio Bristol. So they interviewed me and did a full page feature for the back page of their magazine called Bristol Lives. So it's a free magazine that goes to the estate agents and coffee shops in Clifton in Bristol, which is up a big massive hill and is quite an expensive area. Not quite, it just is an expensive area to live in. So I'd go up every month to try and get a copy of the magazine to see if I was in it. And then I'd go in this estate agent and open it up and not be in it and close it and kind of leave that downcast. So magazines work months in advance. So it was August when I was in the magazine. So that was wonderful when they featured a verse about Christina Rossetti and also Darth Vader. So I was really chuffed with that. And then later in April, I just had a brilliant day on April the 22nd. It was a perfect day because Upload played Bristol Bike Bard, the one with the Bike Bell Orchestra. And then the Handlebars announced that I was one of the 4 picked for the Gear Shift programme. So they became my mentors, like my official Obi-Wan Kenobis. So after they told me that, I then told them, by the way, I'd written a verse about you a year ago. And it was just the connection was amazing, I think. So I started having meetings with them. And then in May, things got even more surreal. So Dave McFarlane, who'd contacted me before about making a film for the It's Not Easy Being Green, he got back in contact because he's seen Bike Bard on Instagram. And he asked about maybe making a short film about the Bike Bards. So Dave McFarlane's films are amazing, but they're usually about people doing really extreme feats of endurance. Like there's Breaking 10, which is about a man running Land's End to John O'Groats in less than 10 days. And I couldn't even do that on a bike. But we had a good chat and it seemed like a really interesting and exciting thing to do. And my head was in a lot better place than it had been before. So I was in a good headspace. So I said yes. And then I was just working away with the Handlebars, who asked me when I wanted to go on tour. So the options were, this was May, by the way. So the options were that I could either go on tour that summer, very imminently, or I'd have to wait until the following year because I was going to be touring by bike. So it needed to be in the summertime. So I just thought, I better just walk the talk and go for it. So I started planning for a cycle poetry show tour that summer. And one of my ideas was to play local bike shops. So I messaged my bike shop in Hanham, John Woods, the place I'd written a verse about, and they said yes. So I had my first night booked at least. And I planned to go over the West Country for the entire month of August. And I discovered the logistical nightmare that is planning a bike tour with a show attached to it, because a bike tour is complicated enough with the distances and accommodation. But then there was the added jeopardy of venues that were saying yes or maybe or no, and then I'm by bike, so can I get between the places? And then the logistics of ticket sales and promotion and actually putting the show together as well. So it was just one of me, but I was fine. Naivety and enthusiasm. I think I've heard Stuart Lee say that on a podcast a long way. So it was all just kind of snowballing in a really wonderful way. And then at the end of May, a producer from BBC Radio 4 contacted me from a programme called Sketches. So that programme's about different people doing different types of art. And the producer Maggie had also heard me on BBC Radio Bristol and asked if I'd do an interview. And she suggested I listen to the programme first to get an idea of if I liked it or not. So they had a whole list of different programme titles. So I clicked on one that was called On the Road. And then I started laughing because the people they were interviewing, it was the Handlebars. So I was like, yeah, okay, I'll do the interview. Of course, I'll do the interview. It's Radio 4 anyway, but it was just, of all the interviews, I picked the one that was the Handlebars. So we arranged a meeting at the start of June. So all these amazing things were happening. but I did notice my anxiety was starting to get on the rise. And I figured it was because I was trying to do too many things and too many new and different things all at once. And there was only one of me and not enough time. So one of the ways I recognized it was anxiety and not just nerves was because the night before the Radio 4 interview, I was really stressed and nearly tearful, just looking at how I was going to get to the interview. And I knew that was out of proportion, because it was only I had to get around the M32, but it was somewhere I'd been before, and it was only 3 miles away. But one of the ways I notice anxiety is I start trying not to leave the house or finding reasons not to leave. So it was a little bit of a wake-up call that even though all these things were amazing, I still need a break or need to go easy, otherwise I can kind of crash and burn. So I need to be a bit careful that way. But I met Maggie, and I didn't sleep well, but she put me the night before. So on the interview, I think I sound really high-pitched and out of breath, but she interviewed me for an hour. She was really gentle and put me at ease. And that hour got edited down to 8 minutes, interspersed with some poetry. And it was lovely. And the program title is called Long Roads. So it's still up on iPlayer. And it's got 3 creatives, 3 of us on a half-hour program talking about what we're doing. And again, Maggie kind of put this really nice gentle music in the background during the audio of my vocals. So I think again, it's showing how background music can really lift a piece. So I'll just play a short clip to illustrate that. It's me talking about cycling as a kid.
And then when I was a teenager, I got my first really good bike. So when I was about 13, I would go off on this bike path to the loch, and I was just a teenager, so I was kind of introverted and read a lot, and then I'd go off on my bike on my own and sit and look at this loch, and then I'd cycle back home, and I'll have done 10 miles and been out for a couple of hours, and I like the pace of it.
So again, it's all this, it's interesting here in the music side, because I can't sing and I can't play any instruments, so it's nice hearing how other people put things together. So one of the questions Maggie asked me, because the interview was in June, was why I kept writing the bike bard verses, because my original intention was just to do it over winter and stop when the clocks went forward again, and I was obviously still doing them. So it took me a while to figure out why, and the answer is that the bike bard verses were proven really good for my mental health. So I write a lot of other things that aren't necessarily upbeat in tone, but overall, as the montage of bike bard verses shows, I focus on them, on things that make me happy. So the value of them is in doing something that's positive for me. So to illustrate, in this montage, what I've got is me cycling over the Severn Bridge to Wales. There was one day I was ill and couldn't go out on my bike, so I did a verse about my Princess Leia Star Wars figure on a little model bike. There's a stone circle 10 miles from Bristol, Stanton Drew, which I just love going to. There was the Circus Angels. In Queen Square in Bristol, there was all of these spray painted hearts 2 meters apart in the Queen Square to keep everyone safe during COVID, and that was done by the people that do Upfest, the street art festival that happens here. And then if anyone knows me, they know that I really like otters, so there's some street art otters, which I just love cycling past. There was another day I went to a park and there was a rope swing, and I ended up getting on it because there was nobody around, and so a middle-aged woman could get up on a rope swing. And then just stuff like, as well as the stars, just trying to learn about wildflowers and nature. So there was grape hyacinths just in a scrabby back lane. And then I kept going back to a particular tree that I really like. It's an oak tree. So I kept going and writing verses about a tree. So that's why I kept writing them, because for that moment of each day, I've guaranteed that I've done something that makes me happy, and amidst all the other stuff that goes on. So I'm not saying it's a substitute for medication or therapy or a one size fixes all for mental health, but it contributes towards me helping my mental health. So then in June, we get to June, and Dave McFarlane travelled to Bristol to film for 2.5 days, bike barred versus on location. So we went up Troopers Hill to my favourite tree, out to the Clifton Suspension Bridge, to the literary wall plaques. We visited the Druid in the graveyard, cycled on the bike path, we went all over. I even called up the local bike shop and they let us go and film a verse there. And then Glenside let us film an hour-long interview in the grounds of the Hospital Museum. So everything connected up again. It's really, I just find it interesting, the connections. And we also filmed another poem. We did an It's Not Easy Being Green verse, and we did another poem, which is the first of mine that ever got published online, not just on my social media, called Junkies in the Underpass, which is in the top right photo there. We had to wait a wee while to film that, because just off camera there was 2 men screaming abuse at each other. So the location was being quite authentic. So we did all that film, and then Dave went back north to edit all of that down to about a 10-minute film. So July was then filled with hectic preparations for the Cycle Poet Tour, and I finally posted the last of the 367 It's Not Easy Being Green videos. 367 because I can't count. I can write and do words, but numbers not so good, so I had an extra verse that I didn't need. And then in mid-July, I supported the Handlebars, who were touring with Macbeth. So it was in nearby Bradford on Avon at a place called The Hall, which makes folding bikes. They're a folding bike company. So I stood on the stage with my bike in front of 200 Handlebars fans, and I hadn't been on a stage since before the pandemic. So it was a bit of trial by fire, but it was just surreal and wonderful. And then I got to watch a comedy version of Macbeth. So the Scottish play done as a comedy is just fabulous, and I would recommend going and seeing it if you can, because it's just wonderful. So then that all took me into July. The end of July, I played my local bike shop. I took Cycle Poet on the road, and then all of August I was away and played the West Country. I went to bike shops, Coleridge Cottage, National Trust property, village halls, campsites, arts venues, a pub in the street, and I even did a bit on a ferry. So I just played anywhere that would let me do my poems. And then I got back to Bristol, and Adam continued playing more of my bike bards. So I've finished writing them now. I've done a new arrangement of bike bells. So this is the latest version. I'll play a minute of it.
Cycling was magic today. Narnia was revealed. A narrow boat with a Mr. Tumnus street lamp floated on Dundas Aqueduct beside where I wheeled. There's music in a tunnel playing through a gentle amp. Part of the 2 tunnels, one's as long as a mile. An amazing Susteren cycling tunnel revamp.
So that's the latest one. So I wrote 180 verses in total. I stopped on the 1st of November last year, for now, unless I decide to do something else. I've been writing other things. So my last verse goes, the clocks went back, making nighttime lurch forwards, turning earth towards a colder season. And I dream awake on Troopers Hill for that which me and my bike search. So in November, that takes us to November, and Dave McFarlane got in contact to let me know that his film, The Bristol Bike Bard, had been officially selected for Kendal Mountain Festival in the digital arts category. So it got shown on site at Kendal and online, because their festival was virtual as well. So it's been a remarkable year for a project that I started for my own benefit, for all of this to end up happening, and now giving a talk at the Cycle Touring Festival about it as well. So we'll now watch the 10-minute film. It's 9.5 minutes, and if you come back afterwards, after we've watched, or stay, then we can do some questions at the end if you like. Okay, thank you. And hopefully someone will start the film. Graham started, okay.
A function of writing things down is to organise thought processes into something that can be more easily understood. The words in a poem are like the lyrics to a song. The lines have a beat and a rhythm just like music. When a poem's written clearly and lyrically, it can convey observations and emotions that tap into a shared experience of what it is to be human. I biked up Troopers Hill to see Bristol displayed. Shaped by mines and quarries, it's now a protected reserve, a win for nature since those industries decayed. Poetry gets a terrible rep. It's been commandeered by, I don't know, people that think that poetry should be ambiguous and be thee and thou and obscure. I laugh cycling down the named Granny's Lane. Lane means it's wide enough to roll a cask of wine. But why is it called Granny's? Did she stop wine spillage? I ride my bike and I write poems and stories quite often about what I see on my bike. Poetry is a bit like music, a bit like a song. It has a short immediacy to it and can communicate really well an emotion or a feeling or a moment in time. It's different when you write a short story or a longer story, but in a poem it favours brevity. So it's really trying to condense something. Kingswood, in medieval terms, means a royal hunting preserve, where from Lodge Hill, Saxons sought and chased wild deer for dinner. Now near here, for the people's meals, it's takeaways which serve. The bike is my freedom. That's my vehicle, you know, so it's my literal vehicle, but it's also it's also an emotional vehicle. You know, going for a bike ride generally doesn't ever make anything worse. At the bike shop, their door has a COVID screen to speak through and a fab bike bell on handlebars to ring for service. Reassuring and nice touches from an indie venue. About a year and a half ago, I had an acute depressive episode, and it's not the first time it's happened. It's happened a few times in my life. Luckily, I got better, because like any kind of illness or injury, you get better with help. But I'm aware of you know, what some of the warning signs and symptoms are for anxiety and depression, and I think it's been quite tough with lockdowns for a lot of people anyway, because you become isolated. But one of the warning signs of depression especially is self-isolation, which I was definitely doing a year and a half ago. You just get smaller and smaller and hide away, and combined with anxiety, it's really difficult to go outside. So I thought, well, one way to make myself go out on my bike is if I just write a verse of poetry about something I see. So that's how Bristol Bike Bard kind of emerged. We're outside where Thomas Chatterton was born. He was a poet who died when he was 17, born in Bristol, and made really famous by the Romantic poets who sort of championed him. Wordsworth and Coleridge mentioned him in a poem, and he was made famous in a painting of a sort of doomed poet dying in an attic, poor, and by suicide in the painting, although it's not sure if that's how he actually died. And he's really special to me because one of my first commissions was to write a poem related to 250 years of Thomas Chatterton being dead, and it was to do with challenging stereotypes associated with mental health, which is something that's really important to me. Thomas Chatterton's birthplace is what this verse composes. He was born in a house that's now a cafe on Redcliffe Way. Most poets die young or poor, is what history shows us. I love this tree off Troopers Hill's beaten footpath. Me, my bike and a blackbird sat amongst seed-sowing winds. Whether it be Old English or sessile oak, perched here many hath. Some poetry is really obscure. You also have to dedicate a bit of time to read it. From school or a wedding or a funeral sometimes, usually people have got something that they do like, but they just don't necessarily regard themselves as poetry fans. There is a street in Bristol where local humour combines with a phrase people say when getting off the bus. Folks voted to name this street Cheers Drive, one of life's great signs. I decided to try and be a bit more environmentally friendly for a year. And I thought one way to do that would be to write a verse a day for an entire year. The way everything is structured, it is not easy being green. So it was about where I was going right and where I was going wrong. I'm confused by people alone in cars, getting angry at other people alone in cars. People spinning in the gym have driven. Riding a real bike reduces congestion. It's not easy being green, but just cycle, walk or run. I don't specifically set out to write a social commentary poem. It's because it's what I'm feeling about something that it comes out. I would go through this underpass on my commute home from work, and there'd be this guy dealing there, and he was so brazen and it was so wrong. And it was a bit the dark side of the city, you know, because this guy was just taking advantage of people and making his profit that way, and he'd be so brazen when I'm cycling home on my commute, and I'm scared, you know, going through my route home. And the underpass has got these mosaics that are making their own kind of commentary of Bristol. And it's a nice mosaic, it's all graffitied and some history is omitted, and I was so annoyed, and I felt like this would make a poem to express it. It was like a compulsion, because it's like, how do I deal with this? There's nothing I can do in this situation. I'm just angry about it, so I can at least express it in words. I cycle quickly past the Junkies in the Underpass. Their dealer stands dead centre, a white man dressed in black, astride a bike with no lights. This underworld, his stage. Evening, brays this king of short, sharp pricks, as I ride wide of him, peddling his shit to two locals laid low between the broken glass and grit. His shout carries a glint, like the water in the bottle, and the tarnished metal spoon I spy left at pedal level, a scene waning like the moon. Yellow light reveals them huddled beneath the underpass's mosaics, which depict a long history of most of Bristol's trades, this current exchange excluded, and the sugar and the slaves. Graffiti scrawls across the pictures, letters and words all strung out. Not street art, not a Banksy, just a public place defaced. It's an update representing this exact time and space.
I think that's a really beautiful film, and I think of the combination of the sounds, the words, and the video and the music as well is just a really beautiful thing to watch. So congratulations for that, Caroline. Now there are a couple of questions.
It's Dave that did all the work, so it's hats off to Dave for putting the film together. Yeah, Dave McFarlane.
Yeah. Well, it's not difficult to see why it was shortlisted and shown at the Kendal Festival, or is it the Keswick Festival? It's the Keswick Festival. We had this conversation earlier with Laura. Yeah, people mix them up, and I just did. And I've written down a couple of things here from what you said when you were talking earlier. And I think when you said, I made myself Bristol bike barred, whether Bristol wanted me one or not, I thought that was a great idea, because I think that's kind of a good mantra for life. You know, you're never going to get approval for everything you want to do in life. You're never going to be asked to do things that you want to do, and just going out there and doing it. I think you're a really good example of somebody who's done that, and hopefully now they do want one, having seen what you're capable of doing. I think you also made a really good point about cycling and poetry, about it being a niche. And I think this is one of the good sides of social media, in that you will find, if you've got a niche and you go out there and you spread the news about your niche, you will find people to actually share your niche with you. So yeah, I think that's really good. I can see that Laura has corrected me. It was Kendal.
It's Kendal.
It was Kendal. Sorry. It's because we were talking about Keswick earlier.
And it's been, Dave told me it's, I think it's been approved for Sheffield Film Festival as well, SHAF this year. Yeah. Okay,
well, that's excellent. And because I know SHAF, they actually have a tour as well, don't they? They put a film together of all, or a selection of the bits and pieces. So hopefully, you know, you might end up in that as well. So excellent. Now, before we get to anybody else's question, don't think anybody else has asked my question. And I did say that I had one, and nobody else has managed yet to put their question in a rhyming couplet, but I have. So here's my question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
And it's about the video. And it goes, when you cross the bridge in Clifton, there was no traffic in sight. How did you manage to arrange that feat? Did it involve a cyclist-motorist fight?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad you've written a rhyming couplet, because that's social engagement project right there. We kept going across. We went, when did we do it? It was still kind of last summer, so it was June. It was late, it was getting twilight and then dark. So we kept going across until, I guess, Dave got the shot. We did it a few times. And he came down a second time to film again to get more shots. So I guess the fates were just on our side as well, without a car going behind us.
Well, I think I've cycled across, and I've certainly walked across, and my memories of the Clifton Suspension Bridge are that it's always packed with traffic. So so well done on doing that. Tina asks, is there a book, or is there going to be a book?
Oh, I would love there to be a book. I've put all the bike bards into manuscript form, and I've started sending it out. And again, it's one of those things where I just need to keep sending it out, and hopefully one day I'll get a yes instead of a no letter, or someone will know someone that might know someone to help get it published. I'd love to get it published. That's on. I'm trying. I've got the manuscript. If anyone wants a manuscript, I'll send it to him. Yeah.
Have you thought of self-publishing it?
Yeah, maybe if it doesn't get picked up, then I think I would have a go at that. Yeah, definitely.
Well, you can now do. I remember one of my books in Waterstones, I once removed the sticker from a far more famous author than me, which said, as read on Radio 4. I peeled it off and stuck it on my book in this branch of Waterstones. But you can validly put that on the front cover of your book. Yeah. As read on Radio 4.
That's heard on Radio 4. I can maybe I get that on my gravestone as well eventually. But yeah, do anything. You have to do anything you can to kind of blow your own trumpet or get it publicized, because it's just really hard. So, well, I do like the idea of you going around putting stick. Yeah, you could put any kind of sticker on there. Chicklet 2020 favorite, voted favorite by Marie Claire. Do everything and see which one works.
There's probably some poor reader of the book that I put it on who's still searching BBC Sounds for the audio version of my book, but it might have to wait a while. There's another question from I've lost it. There it is, Michaela, and she says, do you have a particular poem or poets you tend to go back to, particularly to help with the anxiety?
Yeah, there's a lot of poets that I go back. There's some steadfast favorites, especially sometimes. One of the things with anxiety and depression is it can affect cognitive ability, like being able to concentrate. So poetry can be quite good because it's short sometimes if you can't read paragraphs, or so sometimes I read stuff out loud if I'm having a bad kind of day or something. So poets I particularly love, and poets are we are quite a depressing bunch sometimes. So I really love poems by Emily Bronte because they're so emotional, and it's all the landscape of, it's like Wuthering Heights in poetry form. It's so deep in emotion, but with the wild landscape as well. I really love reading her. I love Sylvia Plath, again, because of the some of it can be a bit hard to, it's a little bit obscure sometimes, but the emotion is just so powerful. And then Wilfred Owen, because his are like narrative stories. So I'm reading, what am I reading at the moment? Oh, I'm reading Homer's Odyssey as a bit of light entertainment. That's taken me a long time to get through. So I kind of go back to, Wilfred's sort of always with me, and Emily Bronte and Sylvia Plath. Christina Rossetti as well, like Goblin Market, that's a great. So I find the rhythm, it's like music, and read it out loud and it can distract if getting anxious. Yeah.
Is it Thomas Chatterton that you mentioned in the talk? Was he actually famous at the time when he was alive? Because he died at the age of 17, you said. Yeah. Was he only discovered later?
He became sort of infamous when he was young because he was sort of a child. He was sort of a genius, really. I mean, he wrote, there's a church opposite where he was born, St. Mary Redcliffe, and he wrote this imagined poetry by a medieval monk, which he said he'd found in the church. And it kind of was believed to be true. So it was a fake. So he got kind of exposed as being a fake, but he was just a teenage boy that created his own sort of medieval language in this kind of pseudonym, really. So he got some notoriety for that, and then he moved to London and he was selling articles to magazines and things like that. He was working, so, but he died at 17, at the time classed as suicide. But they've also got the apothecary notes from where he bought medication, and they think it might have been accidental overdose from medication. So that's his story kind of got picked up by the Romantic poets. So he's in a Wordsworth poem, he's in a Coleridge poem, he's in the Wallace painting. So they kind of made the myth of him bigger, this doomed poet kind of trope.
There's lots of positive comments about what you've said today and your work. You have a lovely voice, says Dean, and very powerful poetry. Very positive comments down there. Now, Katie Milburn asks, and she comments, so inspiring, especially the mental health self-help plan. How do you write? Do you take notes or voice recordings, or just write from memory when you get home?
I do write from memory, but I make a lot of notes, and I write a lot of lists or notes, or I write almost like a story, like in prose, and then sometimes convert that into a poetic form. I really like not old, but traditional poetic forms, like a structure like sonnets or terza rima. I like the structure of a form, personally, for me. So what Wilfred, this is kind of goes back to learning from, if you're going to get taught by someone, go to Wilfred Owen or someone you admire. They don't have to be alive or dead or in real life. So if you look at Wilfred Owen's letters to his mum, the content is almost the same as what's in a poem, and he's kind of transformed it. So I kind of do that. I'll go on a bike tour and I'll make lots of notes and keep a diary, and then I'll write it up in a big kind of report, and then I'll condense it into what I think the threads or the story of the poem is. I've usually got about 4 notebooks on the go and the same poem in the wrong notebooks. It's a complete chaos that I'm trying to make sense of a lot of the time.
Yeah, Andrew Hayward has asked, and this is kind of connected to what you just said. He says, how long does a poem take you to write? And also, is it difficult to know when to put your pen down when finishing a poem? But because you presumably fit, your poems have they stick to a kind of almost a set structure, that kind of must make life easier when, in terms of the length of your poems, in terms of having to put things together in 5 or 6 lines.
Yeah, it depends on the poem. So, for example, the Bike Bards and It's Not Easy Being Green, they were sort of a different type of poem in that they were daily, so they had to, I'd have an hour and a half or so to get them done, and then they're done. But if it's like Junkies in the Underpass or the Wilfred Owen Odyssey, they can take months sometimes, and I'll write and write and write, and then I'll get a bit stuck, or I won't be sure how to make the language flow. So then I'll have to put it away for a couple of weeks, and then I'll come, and it is true, you come back to it and it's kind of fresh eyes, or you can see something, a thread coming through it that will help. But that's why I have a notebook all the time, because then I'll have an idea when I'm somewhere else and I'll go, oh, that's what that should be. So I've usually got quite a lot of different things on the go at the same time. And this stuff that's brewing, this stuff that, there's notes of poems from a few years ago that are still not done, but other things that have been. It's a very strange activity. Yeah. Right.
Well, we're under orders. We've got to finish by 15:15. So we've got 3 minutes. So if you've got a question, then be quick about it. Bernard Rag Morley, he wants to know, have you managed to stay green since the end of your green year?
Okay, so I'm trying. I'm still getting milk bottles in glass. I am, and I went to an ethical bank in Triodos. I don't know if should I tell everyone? They're an ethical bank anyway. So I'm trying. It's a constant struggle, isn't it? So I am trying my best. I'm not perfect at it. It's just to keep trying, I guess. And the system is not in our favour.
Do you think you'd be a poet without the cycling, or do you think you'd be a cyclist without the poetry, or either, or both?
I think I'd be a cyclist regardless of anything. I've always kind of written my tour reports and stuff. I write about, not all of my poetry does involve a bike, so that would probably have come about as well. But I suppose, I don't know. It's like, yes, I'd be both. Does it
help you? I mean, the one nice thing, or one of the great things about cycling, is the fact that it forces you to think, because you can't really do much else. Do you come up with poetry while you're cycling?
I come up with lines. I come up with the rhythm of the bike. It definitely fits to the rhythm of some meters of poetry, and that's quite funny. And I've got a poem about how it used to be the song "When the Going Gets Tough, the Tough Gets Going" would always play in my mind when I went cycling. It would drive me mad because it's a good song, but it's not my favorite. But it's an example of how lines of meter, like Ozymandias, used to play in my mind when I was a literature student. So they fit. Yeah, it's quite good that actually, when you get a rhythm of a line pop up.
Okay, well, I thought that was fascinating, and I thought the film, like I said earlier, was beautiful. So thank you for that. Now, a reminder that people, if you haven't yet donated to the Cycle Touring Festival, then please do so. The link is further up in the chat. Caroline, where's the best place for people to connect with your work?
All right, so everything is Verse Cycle, verse for poetry, cycle for bicycle, Verse Cycle, Caroline Burrows on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. There's another Caroline Burrows poet in Brighton. She's brilliant. She's not Verse Cycle. So there's the differentiation there is that I'm the Verse Cycle Caroline Burrows to find me.
Okay. And in my best Radio 4 voice, I'm going to say, join us again at 5 p.m. when Bernie and Sarah will be talking about fat biking through Colombia and Ecuador. And then later this evening at 8 p.m., the man himself, Mr. Barry Godin, will be answering that immortal question, what calls us to adventure? Okay. So without further ado, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Laura. And I'm looking forward to actually just sitting back and watching later. So thank you for joining us, and have a good afternoon, or what remains of the afternoon, before we reconvene at 5 o'clock.
Thanks, everyone.